So on behalf of SABCA today, we're going to talk about privilege and the health to wealth gradient. So just to go ahead and start off, we're going to talk about what these things are, but we just want to say thank you guys for being vulnerable with us and allowing us to be up here and being vulnerable. Just keep that meditation in your heart today as we proceed. These topics are a little touchy for certain people, and we spent the last 2 months planning out this seminar to do our best job not to offend anybody, but just to lay out some of the statistics and showcase how chiropractic can really be the bridging gap in this.
Hello. So talking about framing privilege, when it comes to naming privilege, it is not meant in any way to make you feel guilty or ashamed in any form whatsoever. We can also be privileged and marginalized at the same time, which people often oversee. When it comes to privileges, benefits, and taking advantage, and the power that comes with being a member of a dominant group as a result of oppression of the marginalized group, that is literally the definition of privilege. And we do have individual privileges, but as it's linked to a larger system of inequities, it does also affect the oppressor as it's affecting the oppressed as well. And these legacies have a long history in the hierarchy of our systems. So my question for you is, how will you take your awareness of these legacies of inequities and work to undo them?
So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a privilege walk. So I invite all of you to take out your seminar cards, and on the back just draw a line down the middle, and you can write steps forward and steps backwards, so that way you can all participate in this experience without actually having to do the walk up here. So we're going to go through each question, and each question I'm going to go ahead and preface what it means to take a step forward and to take a step backwards. Once we're done with this privilege walk exercise, Xavier is going to come up here and just really break down what the questions correlate to and what it means. So I'll give you guys all a second to get your seminar cards out. And then we'll start with question number 1. So question number 1 is, if you were ever called a name that put your race, gender, or sexual orientation down, you're going to take a step back. And if this has never happened to you, you'd take a step forward. So statement number 2, if there were people who worked for your family as servants, landscapers, gardeners, or nannies, you'd go ahead and take 1 step forward. That just means that you had an upbringing where there was people working for your family. So if that counts for you, you take 1 step forward. And if it doesn't count for you, you take 1 step back. So statement number 3 is, if you were raised in an area where there was prostitution, gang activity, or drug activity, you're going to take 1 step back. If you lived in a neighborhood that didn't have any of these issues, you'd go ahead and take 1 step forward. Statement number 4. If you were taught the true culture of your ancestors in school, please take 1 step forward. If not, take 1 step back. To preface this question, being Latina and Black myself, I wasn't taught the true culture of my ancestors in school. I was taught a very Eurocentric perspective on history and culture. So it does cause a lot of disconnect. So if you did go to a school where they showed you your culture in the appropriate manners, besides example being Black, besides just slavery, then you would take a step forward or a step back based on that. So statement number 5, if you were ever discouraged from academics or a job because of your race, class, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation, you could go ahead and take 1 step back. And if not, you're going to take 1 step forward if that's never happened to you. Statement number 6, if you were able to take a step forward, take 2 steps forward. This is just more talking about able body and us being able to actually walk. So everybody up here would be able to take 2 steps forward. Oops. If you were able to see members of your race, ethnic group, gender, or sexual orientation portrayed as role models growing up, take one step forward. So this is just kind of, I know that TV is more inclusive now, but we're talking about the formative years growing up. If you were able to see somebody growing up as a role model, for example, a lot of times on TV, Latino or Black people were portrayed as gang members or drug dealers and things like that. There wasn't that perspective of anything different. So you would take a step forward or a step back based on that. If your parents graduated college, take a step forward. And if you were ever uncomfortable about a joke related to your race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but you felt unsafe to confront the situation, take one step back. And if that's never happened to you, take one step forward. Oops. And then if you were ever asked to represent a viewpoint of an entire group, so that means, say there was a situation that happened in class and someone's like, what's your Mexican take on it? That would be taking a step back, because we all are individuals and we can't speak for a whole group, but a lot of times people forget that and they ask you to speak on behalf of a whole collective. So if that's ever happened to you, you would take a step back, and if not, you take a step forward. So I would just like everybody to take a second to see everybody who's up here and just give them a round of applause for being vulnerable with you guys today. That's huge. But this just really shows how we do all come from different walks of life and what our privileges are and aren't in this school. So now Xavier's just going to go ahead and follow up what these questions meant.
Everybody. Oh, shoot, it's on. So hi, I'm a little bit nervous, but let's start it off with saying that just because you are or you do have privilege or wherever you end up in this line doesn't mean that you are any better than anybody. Us being here in this place alone shows that we all have privilege, but it's a matter of what you're going to do about it, right? As Jeannie Ohm would say. So for my people that were in the front, like I said, notice that the people in front of you represent your friends and patients. Going forward, let us take the time to get to know those around us on a deeper level, not just seeing and hearing each other, but actually being able to understand each other and knowing where someone comes from. Knowing that you are not your privilege is really the key thing that we can have in order to kind of bridge this privilege divide that is kind of showing up nowadays. And then as far as my people that are in the back, such as myself, understanding that you are a role model to somebody back home, understanding that on both aspects, you have family members, you have friends, you have family that aren't in the same social category as you or economic category as you. And it's a matter of what are you going to do about it? Once again, being that role model, being that inspiration in order to go forward and make a difference and make the change, be the change that you want to see is really what you need to do. And so, yeah, like as you can see here, if you're in a position to help someone, help them. God just may be answering the person's prayers through you, and whatever your belief system is, whether you want to substitute God for God's or innate, be that as you may. But yeah, that's pretty much the synopsis of everything. Yeah.
And thank you, X. So before I continue, I just want to say that SABCA and LACA have partnered up, and we're going to be doing a decompression lunch in the spa foyer following the seminar, and we want it to be a free space and a safe space for everybody to bring any questions that they had. The reason why I got this idea to do this decompression lunch is I was actually studying with a group of friends over finals, and when we were at my friend's house studying, one of the girls was like, "Hey, Daya, can I ask you a question, but I don't want you to get offended?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" And she said, "Does racism exist?" And I was livid. I was like, what do you mean? And then I kind of checked my own biases within myself, and I said, this is my life, these are my life experiences. The way I view life is gonna be different than other people and how they view it. So I can't be mad at somebody for not having the same life experience as me or having the same understandings. And we actually didn't even study for finals. We spent the next 3 hours talking about life experiences, racism, the different things that are happening to people across the US, and like we were crying, and we had this really connected, heartfelt conversation. And conversations like this need to happen, so we want to provide that space for everybody here after seminar in the spa foyer to go ahead and ask those questions. You might feel like, is this ignorant of me to ask? Like, no, it's not. It's just propelling that conversation forward and giving you guys a space to ask these questions so we can prevent things along the line and just taking away that confusion. So I'm going to start off by talking about medical racism. So I know medical racism in the chiropractic profession does get thrown around like, oh, okay, basically what our field is, it's medical racism, how we're treated by other healthcare providers, and it's not. Medical racism is actually an unfair or subpar care rendered to a person based on their race. Chiropractic, I would say it's medical discrimination. So then the next vocab term we have is the health to wealth gradient. So I actually studied this in undergrad. So I minored in health science, and I took this class just specifically on the health to wealth gradient. And I did my biomedical statistics, and it is crazy. With 99.9% accuracy, the insurance companies can tell you what you're gonna die from and what based on your zip code and your annual median income. And I was blown away by that. Like, you're telling me I just have to give you my zip code and how much money I make a year, and you're gonna tell me with 99.9% accuracy what I'm gonna die from and what. And as we start breaking this down, this was actually really heavily researched by the epidemiology department at UC Berkeley. So as we started breaking it down and researching it, it did have a correlation health to wealth, but also race to health and life expectancy. So where I've seen these systems put in place is before coming here, I was an EMT for the Bay Area. So I worked Tri-County, I worked Contra Costa, Santa Clara, and Alameda County. And Santa Clara counties is one of the more notable EMS departments in the United States. So working there, especially like at 18, was like a huge deal. Like, whoa, like you're working for Santa Clara County EMS, that's huge. And I remember going through the academy, and we had medical racism training day, and I was like so excited, even though I had like 2 hours of sleep and I was never been so sore in my life. I was like, yes, let's do it. This is gonna be exciting. It's gonna be cool stuff. And I remember I sat in the front and I was there and I was listening, and the person who was leading the workshop was like, okay, so we're gonna start off with Black people. And I was like, okay, cool, like let's see where this is going. And he's like, yeah, so he's like, this is all information for your safety and your protection. He's like, all Black people do heroin. He's like, and they're all HIV positive, so make sure when you're patting them down, you don't stick yourself with their needle. And I was like, nobody in my family does heroin, and nobody in my family has HIV. And I was just sitting there like so perplexed and confused, like, what is this man talking about? And he's like, oh, don't forget all Black people are gang members, so make sure you restrain them during transport so they don't attack you. It's about your life, it's about your safety. And I just remember sitting there and I was like, he has to be kidding, right? This is a joke. And I looked behind me and everybody was taking notes. And I was like, we're gonna be saving lives, and we have these mentalities in our head. And then he went on to talk about Latinos, and he's like, Latinos are crybabies. He's like, their nervous systems aren't like our nervous systems. He's like, their 10 out of 10 pain is actually 1 out of 10 for us. They don't know how to deal with pain. So don't administer pain meds to Latinos unless you think they really need it. Then he went to talk about Asian people, and he was like, Asian people think they're a lot smarter than us. So he's like, when it comes to rendering care, don't give them an opinion, don't tell them what you're doing, you just work through it. And then he started talking about people from the Middle East, and he's like, you as a woman, don't get out of the ambulance to render care. It's being respectful to their culture. And I just sat there like mind blown, and I said, well, what about white people? And he said, what about them? He's like, make sure you render care how you should, and all their complaints are valid. He's like, do you have any other questions moving forward? And I just sat there like, just how I am telling you this, like, is this real life? Is this really happening right now? And I was like, you know what? People have common sense. These things aren't gonna affect us in any way or shape out any differently. And I've seen people die because of this. I've had partners refuse to render care to certain people in certain situations because of the things that they were told. So it's like, we have to be mindful and impactful how these negative connotations and stereotypes are killing people. And it's not funny, and it's not a joke, and it's the way society has things laid out, but it's not okay. And that brings me to the next thing, is trust level. People of color have a very hard time trusting healthcare professionals because of the health to wealth gradient and the subpar care that they receive because of these preconceived notions. It's gonna be a lot harder as white medical professionals to be able to bond with your patients of color. And I say this to preface, to understand the relationship you have with them is gonna be different, and that is okay, but you need to be mindful and understand that. when you have your report of findings or you're doing your exams, make sure you explain everything fully, thoroughly. Make sure every question that they have is answered so you can establish that relationship and bring that trust back to health. I feel like a lot of this medical racism and the health to wealth gradient, what's based on income, also comes from this lack of having that trust with your healthcare provider. So we need to go ahead and break those barriers down. Some of these barriers include the poverty tax, food deserts, and lack of education. Those are a whole lecture in itself. I just wanted to bring those terms up. So like poverty tax is living in a low income area. All your bills will actually be higher. So your percentage for your auto loans, groceries, and there will be food deserts, which means there's not access to good food in that area, especially here in Hayward and San Leandro. I'm sure you guys see it. We got to go to Oakland or Fremont for Whole Foods, like, sucks. And then the lower level of education. So this is just a breakdown of the annual income in the United States. So the white line or the blue line is for white people in the United States. The black line or the red line is for Black people in the United States, and the orange line is for Latino people in the United States. So with the health to wealth gradient, we can see that the longest life expectancy in the United States, as we move to the next chart, would be for white men. And the lowest life expectancy are for Black and Latino people in the United States. So this has been researched by UC Berkeley, and the question is why and how. And it just kind of break down to the capitalistic society that we do have in place, why these systems work out and things happen the way that they do. But the way that we're actually starting to see these impacts is in higher cortisol levels. So due to these higher cortisol levels, these are some of the ways that health in Latino and Black women are actually being impacted. So African American women, regardless of college education, regardless of annual income, due to growing up with racism, have the lowest birth rates in the United States. Secondly, Latino and African American women are the highest and most likely to die during childbirth because of these increased cortisol levels and also that lack of education and breaking down those barriers with healthcare providers. And then thirdly, Latinos have the highest rate of infant mortality in the United States. So as chiropractors, especially those working with pregnancies and infants, these are like really important things to understand and to have and be mindful of how a pregnancy with somebody who's Black or Latino may be different because of these high cortisol levels and life experiences. So with the health to wealth gradient, what it shows is 99.9% accuracy. We can the health insurance companies can pinpoint what you're going to die from and where. And what the studies show is that white people in the United States have the best health. But as Dr. McBride says, there's always an anomaly in the body. So there actually is an anomaly within this system. So the one anomaly within this system is actually Mexican immigrants, specifically Mexican immigrants, in this actually have the best health outcome in the United States. Where it's like, how is the poorest of the poor in the United States having better health than people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, who have grown up eating a healthy diet, exercise regularly, and probably don't have as much stress as they do? It perplexed UC Berkeley. It still perplexes me till this day. Until I actually started chiropractic school and I started researching about different emotions and how they affect the brain. And the area where this came into play is UC Berkeley was looking and doing all these studies, and finally they said, let's do brain scan patterns. And when they did that, they saw that there was a hope scan pattern within Mexican immigrants, which other people in the United States weren't having at such high rates. So it was showing how hope actually rewires the brain and rewires health. That's huge. But on the flip side, first generation Mexicans born to Mexican immigrant parents have the worst health outcome in the United States. And they were looking at that too. And that hope pattern that's in their parents isn't in their children. So it kind of gives you to see how your brain is so impactful in your health. And actually that there are these systems in play through this health to wealth gradient, but there's hope and things that can change that. So are we inhibiting innate? I think this health to wealth gradient is inhibiting innate. And what's our job as chiropractors? We need to remove this interference from this system. And I'm not talking about the body, I'm talking about the healthcare system. So by inhibiting this from the healthcare system, we'll be able to restore innate. Because what do we do with each adjustment? We're resetting the nervous system. And by resetting the nervous system, we can add new patterns into our patients. And what should these patterns be? based on this, it needs to be hope. And if we're able to instill hope within all of our patients, what's our future gonna look like? Will this still exist? It won't. With each adjustment that we're giving, we're allowing innate to flow. And we're putting hope back into our patients, but not just back into our patients, back into society. Let's be that ripple effect. Because when we are that ripple effect, we're able to impact so many people. And that's the thing, is we're impacting one person, but this effect is gonna go to their family, to their children. Through chiropractic care, we're able to lower the cortisol levels. We're able to help these people connect, and we're allowing people to heal how they should. So I found this quote when I was actually doing all of this. I was like going through all these slides and putting it all together, and I look up in the wall, and it says, they who have hope, they who have health have hope, and they who have hope have everything. And I think that is true, especially from this, from everything that we've been researching and looking through. Hope is the key and driving factor. So I think as chiropractors, it is our job, it is our duty not only to understand this, but find those gaps and those bridges within the healthcare system, fill them and fix them. And we can go ahead and do that with hope. So thank you.